When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he answered it pretty much in the simplest of terms. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So that's what we are trying to do here at Northeast. In simple terms, we want to love God and we want to love others. So whether it's growing deeper in His love, or discovering His will for our lives, or being challenged to be better people or more responsible, it's always helpful to do these things together. So we thank you for joining us in today's Together time, and we hope you'll be blessed in a very special way.
Good morning, and happy Easter to everyone. As already mentioned by Cedric, we are glad that you have joined us today here in person at the Northeast facility, as well as those of you who have joined us online. It's always good to come together, but it's always special to be able to do so on a special day and see some folks maybe we haven't seen in a while. It's great that we have some guests who are from out of town. We actually want to announce as well a couple of families that want to make Northeast their home congregation, and we are very, very excited about that. I see right over here Nathan and Rebecca Reinhardt. They have come our way from Arkansas, and their boys are still in Arkansas. They're finishing school, so it's been kind of difficult on them. We were just talking about that this morning, how they want to be with their family, but circumstances are not allowing that at this point, but they do plan on coming up in a few weeks. So y'all raise your hand right over there. That's the Reinhardts, and we welcome them to our Northeast family. And let me see, Chad and Karen Reba, I think they are somewhere. Yes, they are right back there. Y'all say hello. We welcome them to the family of God here at Northeast. They're excited about becoming a more active part of things. They lived west of here, and then they've moved out east, and Northeast is closer, and they're also excited about getting plugged in with what's going on here, including we have something new coming up in the first Sunday in May, and that is we're starting a whole new lineup of Bible classes. Those of you who are not aware of where we've been, we started back in-person worship services, and then it wasn't until sometime later that we started just a few weeks ago in-person Bible classes. But there will be several offerings, and we are excited about the lineup for our Bible classes starting the first week of May. And I'm not going to give you all the details right now, but be paying attention to your email this week. It'll be coming Tuesday or Friday to give you some details, and then sign-ups for those classes are going to occur later on. But just be looking for that. There are plenty of ways as we move forward dealing with the pandemic. We're kind of breaking out, as we've talked about, and this is one of the ways that we are. So I encourage you to check that out and to participate in that, and I believe you will be blessed for it. How many of you went to Christian camps growing up or have gone recently? I want to see the hands. Oh, man. That is at least half to two-thirds of the people who are here. Do you remember the song, Pass It On? Man, that is a classic camp song. I think we should sing it here sometimes. It's a great song with a great message. You see on the screen here that there's a campfire and people singing around and warming them up to that campfire. And it starts out, it only takes a spark to get a fire going. And then all those around will warm up to its glowing. I know some of you are singing this in your minds right now. We'll warm up to its glowing. We could sing it right now if you wanted to. That's how it is with God's love. Once you've experienced it, you want to sing. It's fresh like spring. You want to pass it on. You want to pass it on. You want to share in that warmth of God's love. And it is wonderful. There's a line in there. In fact, part of the singing came from that line. It says, "What a wonderful time is spring when all the trees are budding, the birds begin to sing, the flowers start their blooming." And that's how it is with God. He shares and gives to us so that we can pass it on. And that's part of the message of Easter. And that's really at the core and the heart of what I want to talk about today. And it really might be starting out to be illustrated with the account of how the news of the results of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, the battle between the Britons and the French, how that news was carried to England. And as the account goes, the people were waiting. They knew that Napoleon was in battle with the Duke of Wellington, and there were some other forces that were battling, but a lot was at stake. Napoleon was expanding, although he was having some problems at the time, dominated a lot of Europe, and Britain was concerned about that, and that was that key, crucial battle. Songs have been written about it at Waterloo, and so the people in England were anxiously awaiting the results. But back in those days, I mean, you didn't have text messages, you didn't have satellites, you didn't have cable news, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't have any of those methods of communication. So basically, it had to be by foot or by horse or sometimes a chariot or a wagon. And certainly one way to communicate was by ship. And that's what the people there in England were doing. They were waiting for a signal from a ship that would be coming from the place of that battle. And so as they waited for the news, someone posted at the top of Winchester Cathedral, and other people are in strategic places to get the message. Finally, a ship appears in the harbor there, and it's a foggy day, and they start with signalers that use flags to send signals, and they could send messages that way. And they began that message, "Wellington defeated." And then before anything else could be done, the fog just set in really bad for a couple of hours. So that's all they got. And so that's what they thought the message was. And for a period of time, there was a gloom that was beginning to be spread over the British Empire at that time in England. Wellington defeated. But 2 hours later, when the fog lifted, the same ship was in port and sent that signal again and finished it. Wellington defeated the enemy. And you can imagine how people in real time, as that news was spread from person to person throughout England, the joyous news that was for them. But for a period of time, they were literally in a fog and thought that the worst possible news that they could have heard that day had come. That they had been defeated by Napoleon and his forces. The exact opposite was true. I think in a lot of ways, when you think about what's happening to the disciples of Jesus in real time, it's kind of like how they got that message in England about the Battle of Waterloo. You could very well say for a period of time that people were thinking, living in terms of the disciples, Jesus defeated. That's where they were. And they were experiencing that in their own lives in real time. Because they had witnessed what happened to him. They had seen his suffering on the cross. They had seen him, many of them placed in a tomb and a stone rolled in front of that tomb and a Roman guard posted to guard that tomb. As far as the disciples of Jesus at that point were concerned, Jesus was gone. Jesus was dead. And they weren't expecting, even though Jesus talked about it on occasion, they weren't expecting anything else. As far as they were concerned, they were thinking about how they were going to move on, but they were certainly in a fog. And on their hearts and in their minds was this, what they thought was reality. Jesus defeated. But you and I know there's an end to that story that doesn't stop there, right? Because Jesus defeated the enemy. They had to be convinced against their better judgment. When they first began to get news of what was happening, there was confusion, there was doubt. When the women who were told to go tell the disciples, as this passage here says, He's not here, He's risen. Go tell the disciples. When they initially went to the disciples didn't believe what they were saying. It wasn't just the fact that the body of Jesus was missing and no one could produce the body. It was the fact that Jesus, over a period of 40 days, in order to convince them that He was alive, appeared to the women, then appeared to the disciples, appeared to Mary Magdalene, appeared to Peter, appeared to the whole group of the disciples at one time. And Paul says on one occasion He appeared to 500 disciples, not disciples that were as deeply involved as these, but to a large group of people. And He had to do that because no one would believe that He had been raised from the dead, because people just don't do that unless He did make those appearances. Jesus defeated the enemy. Death and sin. But it took a little while for the full impact of what had happened in real time in their lives to ultimately turn their worlds upside down. It only takes a spark to get a fire going, but soon all those around will warm up to its glowing. You want to pass it on. And so that's exactly what happened to these disciples. Listen, we read these words right now from the book of Matthew because there were people, and it began as a very small, tiny group of people. In terms of committed disciples, about 120 who were thoroughly convinced that this man who was their master and their leader for 3+ years was alive. And while you might read in Matthew 28 that one of the plans of some of the religious leaders were to say, well, you guards, you need to say that while you were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. And we'll back you up if you have any trouble from the Roman government. They had already done something that could have cost them their very lives. But that saying that the disciples had come, and that's in Matthew 28 too, the disciples came and stole the body while the guards were asleep, was something that was being spoken even as Matthew writes these words as they're being compiled. But listen, we have these words because this message meant so much to the Christian community. There is not a literary work of this day, immediately before it or afterwards, that has the number of writings and manuscripts that our New Testament has. Not even close. And it's because they were so convicted about the truth of this reality that they wanted others to know. So they passed it on orally, and then they wrote it down, and then they compiled it. And that's why we're reading what we're reading right now, because something happened in this community that turned it upside down. From a human standpoint, from a purely human standpoint, There is no reason why a small band of Jewish people who were not movers or shakers or the religious elite or had money or power, there is no reason that a group like that should grow and become what they became unless there was something so life-altering and moving them to conviction that would totally turn that group of initially scared, afraid, hunkered down. The women, they went to the tomb, but they weren't going to see if Jesus had been raised from the dead. They were going to the tomb to finish the business of preparing the body of Jesus for burial. There was doubt. They had to be convinced. But I tell you, once they were convinced, the world changed, didn't it? And we live in that legacy. So Paul could say this to the Romans as he's talking about baptism and he's talking about new life and he's talking about resurrection. He says, don't you know that those of you who were baptized into Christ Jesus, you were baptized into His death? You died with Jesus when you were baptized. I mean, we've already talked about this idea of being a follower of Jesus and Jesus talking about what that means. And He says, you need to be willing to take up your cross and follow me daily if you're going to be my disciple. Paul said, I'm crucified with Christ. Paul says in Romans 6 that we died with Christ in baptism, but he doesn't stop there. He says we were therefore buried with Him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so that we too might what? Might live a new life. New life. It's about newness of life. It's about being transformed. It's about looking at things from a totally different perspective. And I know with us, a lot of us, we've known this story for years. We grew up with it. We know the songs. We know the story. And I guess there may be some of us who might be tempted to say, yeah, okay, I know that. Yeah, Jesus was raised from the dead. I know that. I've been hearing it since I was... But it's hard to... It's hard to grasp in terms of placing ourselves in their position and experiencing this in real time. But it wasn't just them. It was the early community that may not have witnessed the risen Christ, but who believed in that testimony because those witnesses were credible. And it's meant to bring newness of life every moment of every day. In fact, that's something that should never grow old, because it's about real faith in a real Lord who lives today. But sometimes, we grow tired of some things. They're just old hat, right? You ever get tired of a song? You love the song at first, right? Man, I love that song. And then you hear it again and again, or you sing it over and over and over again. First time I heard the song Broken by Lovely the band, I'm listening with my iPods, and not my iPod, but it's the Android version of that, okay? All right, I'm still not one of those i people. So I'm listening, and I have different kinds of music. I have, alternative, I have classic rock, I have Christian, and sometimes I listen to it all mixed together. But man, the first time I heard Broken by Lovely the band, I thought, man, this is, I'm going to, I saved it. I used it as an illustration in a sermon, I think. A year and a half ago, kept it on my playlist, but finally this week, that song came on, and I said, I'm tired of this song. I'm removing it. We get tired of things, don't we? Things we love at first. I have a good friend who says that he is tired of the song Trust and Obey. How can you be tired of trust and obey, right? He just heard it over and over and over and over and over and over growing up, and he just like, not trust and obey. I said, what are you, like the devil or something, not liking that? We get tired of some things. But this is something that we should never get tired of when we think about the implications of what it means, right? Because his call, his life, his presence, his work in us is just as real as it was for those people. It should be. And so when we go to what is called by folks, you might look in your Bible and it might say the Great Commission. That's what we've called it for years. I think it's so important that we get this in our entire discussion of discipleship. And so Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all the things that I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the end of the age. Their message is our message. Their call is my call. Jesus says, go make disciples. Go share the message. And when people believe that Jesus is the Messiah and they're ready to commit their life to Him, baptize them, immerse them as they go down into that water. They picture what Jesus did to save them. He died, He was buried, and raised them back up in newness of life. He calls us. He calls you. And I know in some ways that can be a little bit intimidating because, what are you saying, Grady? I mean, I'm certainly not an apostle. I'm not one of those early disciples who was there. In what way can I do what Jesus is asking us to do here? And so I'm asking you and myself, this church, to think about three angles on the Great Commission. And the first one is for us to look outward. Number one, look outward. And what I mean by that is do ask yourself this question: what role can you play in living out your faith in such a way that it leads others to Jesus? That includes what you say. That includes how you live. That includes a lot of things. What I want you not to do is to immediately jump back and say, look, I can't, I'm uncomfortable teaching in a certain situation, and I'm not going to be able to do what a preacher does or an apostle did or even a Bible class teacher can do. And really, I don't want you to focus on that as much as God could use you. You can be a bridge. And I've shared with you before, fairly recently, ways that you can do that right now that are opportunities that God may be just pouring and laying right into your lap. I mean, we have involvement right now with missions at Northeast, and while we are not taking mission trips right now, God willing, we will be going to Baja and taking more trips to Haiti. And many of you take those trips, and many of you support works and do other supportive works related to those ministries. That's one way we can go and make disciples. But at minimum, I encourage you to simply take this pressure we put on ourselves about being evangelistic by just having the attitude right now as you move on and grow and learn. God, just help me to share what I know and what I believe as you open the door for me. That's not too hard. That's something every one of us can do. I'm not asking you, and God's not asking you to be an expert on everything or to be able to answer every question that somebody might ask you about Jesus or the Bible or faith. If it's real to me, and I've experienced it, and I know some things, and I know why I have hope, share what you know as God opens a door. And look for those doors. Pray. Pray. Pray every day for those who are lost, for those who need Jesus. There are so many things that we can do, but I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm going to move on. We'll talk more about this some other time. The next thing is to look inward. Look inward. Now, I know what you may be thinking here. Well, we're talking about going and outreach. In what sense are you talking about looking inward? And this is where I think we need to remember that we can make a truly powerful impact, and that is by all of us, whatever station of life that we're in, obeying the words of Jesus. Sometimes challenging words, sometimes difficult words, but things about the Bible some of us don't know, we don't understand, but can we not all make an effort with the power of God and His Spirit working within us to obey what we know to be right? There's a lot of mysteries I don't understand, I don't know, and maybe I never will. I might not ever know some of those things even on the other side, and I don't have to. I just want to ask myself, what can I do right now in this moment that's the right thing? And live the kind of life that's going to be a sermon itself, right? What did I talk about last week? One of the things we talked about was how discipleship is built in community. And Jesus, in those statements from the book of John, says, I want you to love each other as I have loved you. And so last week we talked on a practical level some ways that we can show love to one another, and show love to the world. And so I look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, and he just starts out by saying what love is. Love is patient and kind. It's patient. Can you work on your patience? Long-suffering? A little bit later in the same passage, Paul says, this is how you show love. You don't keep account of wrongs suffered. So do you hold on to some things too long and you have bitterness and you show that by the way that you live? Well, that's not loving. That's not looking inward in terms of my relationship with God. And those things make a difference in the impact that my life has on other people. By this, all people will know that you're my disciples if you love each other. And there are ways that we love each other. So many ways here. So many ways. I've told y'all this before. But when I look back at how I was converted, how I became a Christian, a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Christ, certainly there was teaching. And there were people who taught me, and I heard preaching. But I will say this, in terms of what moved me, what also moved me to take that step, to make that commitment, is what people were doing in my life. How they were treating me. And I thank God for people who loved me enough to take the time to show me love in a concrete way. And if that had not happened, I would like to think that I still would have responded to the call to follow Jesus. But I don't know, I'm glad it was there. I'm glad it was there. And you can be there too in somebody's life. You see what I'm saying? So this whole idea of going out and being evangelistic, it's a part of doing this daily walk with the Lord and taking those next steps and growing in the faith and being different is powerful. And I know some of you who are listening right now, whether you're online or whether you're here, I know not all of you are at that place in your life where you just believe absolutely, unequivocally, did I just make up a word? That Jesus rose from the dead. Maybe you're not there. Maybe you're 74% there or 92% there. And I certainly believe there are evidences for the resurrection of Jesus. I'm not even talking about that today. If you look in your bulletin on the last page, there are some connection points that if you have some questions right now about resurrection, there's some great books out there that can just talk about the historical evidence for resurrection. But it's not just about those facts, it's about what those facts mean, which leads me to my last point here in terms of the Great Commission in us. Look upward. Look outward, look inward, look upward. But really, in this one, we're looking upward and inward too. Because we're remembering the words of Jesus when he says, the very end, the end of Matthew, that's the conclusion. That's the conclusion of everything he's talking about. And it's the challenge to me and you and us as a church. He ends that with, I am with you always. And that's important because I know there are lots of folks in here, probably everybody in some way at some point or some time, have struggled with doubts in one form or another. It might not be a doubt about the existence of God, but it might be a doubt about whether you really believe God's working in your life or whether God loves you. It might be, I'm not fully sure about the resurrection of Jesus. And I can't fully tell you, when Jesus is there, he's gathered together with those disciples, and they gather around him, and the text says they worshiped him. But it says, and some what? Some what? But some doubted. Some of those people had seen the risen Christ, and I don't know if it's just the 11 here in this case with others around them, but whatever the case is, that word doubt means uncertainty. They were unsure. They still didn't know where all this was going. But they had faith. And they took things a step at a time. What about your fears? How many times do we see in this discourse, and that's the discourse of the resurrection of Jesus and the message that goes out from that, how many times do you hear Jesus or an angel or somebody saying what? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Because there are a lot of things out there that frighten us. I don't know what's frightening you right now. It may be the fear of disease. It may be struggling at home with some matter, struggling with sin in your life. It may be a relationship issue. It may be just, we've lived in a melee of uncertainty the last year and a half. Hear the words of Jesus to Mary when she realizes she's speaking to the risen Lord. Don't be afraid. And I'm not saying all the answers will come and you'll understand everything, but I want us to really trust these words of Jesus. I'm with you. He reigns. And as his disciples, he lives within us. So let us ask God to help us trust Jesus more. When Jesus says, hey man, I got this. I've got this. I've got it covered. Trust me. Look outward. look inward, and look upward. And when we do that step by step, trusting in Jesus, the one who died for us because he loves us so much, the one who is raised to give us hope, hope forever, hope for life. I began this series by asking you this question: where are you going? And one of the points I made there was, are you on a road somewhere? Where are you going? So I encourage you, don't be on the road to nowhere. Because the road with Jesus, following him step by step, that's where the blessing is. And you can trust him. So whatever it is you may need to do, whether it's that decision to commit to Jesus, go ahead and make that choice and be immersed into him, or whether you just want to find out more. We want to be here for you, and we mean that. And we may not have every answer you're looking for, but I believe we have the answers for the things that are most important. I don't understand everything. I'm still learning. Look outward, look inward, look upward.
There's an old hymn that speaks to our desire for you as we say goodbye today, and thank you for joining us. It says, God be with you till we meet again. By his counsel's guide uphold you, and with his sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again, till we meet at Jesus' feet. Please let us know if we can help you in any way as you seek to dig deeper into finding your place in God's plans. He has wonderful things in store for you, and I encourage you to answer his call. Feel free to check us out at northeastchurch.com. In the meantime, take care, and God bless you and yours.